My name is Sabine Mensah, and I'm Deputy CEO at AfricaNenda Foundation.
Wonderful. And tell us a little bit about what the foundation does.
Sure. At AfricaNenda, we believe that instant payment system, digital payment systems should be available to all, and it should be a catalyst for financial inclusion. So what we do is really work with government, regulator, and private sector to enable national payment systems that are digital, that are inclusive and accessible to the more than 400 million Africans that are unbanked today.
That's wonderful. What countries do you work with in the continent?
Our mandate is Pan-African, and we reach out to all countries. And of course, we work with the ones that take us at our word and engage us right away. We currently have projects ongoing in Rwanda, for instance, and working also with Guinea, with South Sudan, and we work also with regional instant payment systems, so collaboration with GMAC Pay in the Central African region. We also supported the BCAO in the West Africa Economic and Monetary Union. We work with the SADC TCIB instant payment system in the SADC region as well. And like I say, our opportunity is really to ensure that in every single country in Africa, there are digital payment systems that are inclusive. And that mandate is us to carry on by 2030.
So let's say a particular government doesn't know where to start and they call you. What would you actually be doing for them?
That's wonderful. I think what I like about my work is that we really map out the value chain of your needs based on where you're starting. So if a country was just starting, we can then come in and first of all understand what's the vision. What are you trying to build? Who are you trying to serve? And then we will share also some best practices for countries that are already a bit more advanced on their agenda and how they've done it. And see with you, how do we engage the different stakeholders in the ecosystem? Because at the end of the day, it really is an ecosystem play that governments are driving, but ensuring that all the different stakeholders, whether the regulators, there are capacity building organizations, there are the ministries in the government, and there are also the individual that we are trying to serve, that all these stakeholders are represented in the conversation. And it takes really engaging all of them to understand what is the collective vision that's going to serve the population better, and how each party can come in and also bring in their value add in that conversation. So, and understanding where you want to go, helping you do a diagnostic of where you are today, and with you and the stakeholders devise what's the pathway to move forward in building that instant inclusive payment system that we seek. And of course, casting all of that into a broader digital public infrastructure vision.
So when you give examples of the countries that you think employ best practices, give us a sample of one country you might put out there as an example.
Very happy to. Currently, we have a project ongoing in Rwanda. As we engage with that project, the objective was for us to support the development of use cases because they already had an instant payment system. And working with the...
And what does an instant payment system mean for someone who's not technologically savvy?
It's a great question. It's my ability to send you money within seconds using the most basic phone, for instance. It's your ability to pay for government services digitally. It's your ability to send and receive money, but also make payment or receive payments. And that's for us what a national payment system needs to do. More than what you can do with your cash, less costly, less time consuming, and giving you the really ownership to decide where and when you use that service.
So would M-Pesa be considered an instant payment service?
M-Pesa would be considered a channel because it provides mobile money payment services available. At a national payment system level, it's not proprietary systems that you're looking at. You're really looking at a national infrastructure where all the payment service providers can plug in and serve a consumer. If you are my grandmother or anybody in a rural area in Africa, it matters to you that with the most basic phone, you're able to access the national payment ecosystem. While when we're looking at proprietary solutions, I do business with brand A, so you have to do business with brand A for us to communicate in that system. But at a country level, it should be anybody can communicate with any system they have, because that system is interoperable and accessible to all financial service providers. And that's what we advocate for.
So I interrupted you. You were saying that when you did work in Rwanda, they already had an instant payment service. Now we all understand what that means.
Yes.
Now tell us more about what you consider the best practices that they've already employed when you came along.
Wonderful. So engagement was to support the Rwanda project, particularly in building up use cases and the merchant use cases, which is currently on project. But what I like about the approach in Rwanda is really prioritizing development from developers that are in Rwanda. So the journey has been to look at open source software and bringing these developers together and ensuring that they can use the technology and customize to the needs of Rwanda. So this has also enabled a great ecosystem of fintechs and system integrators that are coming along and are providing the service needed for the government and for the population to have an instant payment system that's inclusive and accessible. And for me, that's a good practice because at the end of the day, I think solutions have to be localized to the context of the countries and the populations that we want to serve. And Rwanda's done that very well by making sure that it is developers from Rwanda that are actually developing the solution for Rwanda and using best practices in global community.
Now, I understand that one piece of the puzzle for this to be successful is the know your customer element of it, the ability for people to be identified in order to have access to financial services. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do in that area?
It's a great point because identity is actually at the end of it. For you to have an account, financial services have to be able to identify you one way or the other. Some countries have invested in developing digital identity on top of the regular identity that we see in the ecosystem. And that for me is one component of the digital public infrastructure, one of the building blocks, the identity piece, because it comes into being able to identify you and doing your know your customer due diligence for the financial sector to be able to have an account for you and service you. But then you have the payments layer, which we talked about a bit earlier, and making sure that that payments layer is inclusive. And then you have a third building block, which is looking at how data is shared into that ecosystem. So what we advocate for, it's particularly with government, is to enable an ecosystem and a digital public infrastructure strategy that actually brings all the different stakeholders who are going to use the identity system to be able to service consumers, so that when you're designing at the beginning, you take into account what the needs of the different ecosystem players will be and make sure that your design is inclusive when you are starting. Sadly, what we see happening sometimes is that these developments are done in a silo, particularly with a specific ministry. And when it's finished, then it's bringing everybody and say, now you can use it. Like, great. Here's what's missing. So involve everybody at the beginning of the work, which is really a broad ecosystem contribution into developing what the identity system is, so it can be used by the financial sector and any other ministry. If you are digitizing payments, if you are in agriculture, in health, and for MSMEs, you can all use and leverage the identity system that's there for individual and also for MSMEs. So that consultative process and involving the different stakeholders, even if they're not the line ministry or they're not the driver, the champions of that change, is really necessary to make sure that these systems are interoperable with each other.
Which countries on the continent already have some kind of digital identity?
I think Ethiopia would be a great example where they've really rolled out the digital identity leveraging an open source software called Musip. And I was last year actually in Ethiopia. The work that they've done and including how this impacts the financial system is actually amazing. So having that digital identity facilitate know your customer due diligence processes, enable eKYC to be in the process, and facilitate the onboarding of customers into the financial ecosystem. So that would be one example. I would say that it's working well, but I know that there are several countries that are currently in pilot also and building their digital identity systems.
You mentioned making sure that these systems are inclusive. When you think about, appreciating that we're talking about 54 African countries, but when you think about the specific challenges that African governments have in designing inclusive systems, what are some of the areas that you need to watch out for? Who are the people in society that are not being included, and what are the challenges that those particular people have that the governments of Africa need to be mindful of to make sure that they're building inclusive systems?
The profile of the excluded, financially excluded population usually includes women, rural populations, and also low-income population. So for me, if you are designing an inclusive system, solutions should start by understanding who you want to serve, the ones that are the most excluded, and understanding their realities and how that impact the design of the solutions that you want to put into the place. It is sad to say today that out of the 400 million excluded African adults that I've mentioned earlier, 60% of those are women. Yes, and majority is also coming from these rural areas where the infrastructure is not happening at the last mile, and also with populations that are low income. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be served. On the contrary, I think technology gives us an opportunity to better serve consumers. It's how we design the solutions, how we make them accessible and affordable for people that makes the difference in the adoption.
And what are the strategies to include women?
That is a wonderful question, and I am such an advocate for it. And this is all that we're always driving by saying, first of all, walk the talk, show us the measurement. It is unfortunate as today, most financial regulators are not mandating sex disaggregated data collection. So we know, we estimate at 60%, but for some service it might even be 90%. For some it might be 40%. So by mandating sex disaggregated data collection in the financial ecosystem, that is one way to start clearly understanding the level of gap that we have in servicing women. Another opportunity is for the financial service provider themselves. We design service, people design service, or providers will design service first, and then they will put it on the market and assume that it's just going to be used by everybody. We do understand that there are constraints for women. Some of the constraints include the fact that in some areas they're not the financial decision maker, therefore the service would be used by others on behalf of them. In other areas, we know that distance to a service provider is also a key element. So the ability to provide last mile agents or point of services can also make a difference. The ability to onboard other women, to onboard the unbanked women is also an opportunity, and that is shown that in the ecosystem. Let's say if you take mobile money and you have female agents, they actually do a great job in onboarding other female agents. So having champions within the ecosystem work, designing with women in mind, so really going through what their needs are and how we can service them. A lot of women in rural areas in Africa use SACCOs, a savings, rotating savings mechanism. You can digitize that so that the money is not in the box under the bed where everybody has access to it, but it is actually a financial provider, and that financial provider starts now building a history of these groups of women savings and can extend credit to these women based on an activity that they are already doing. That is what, for me, is designing with women in mind, finding the ecosystem, how women are managing their finances, and how can we plug in a system that makes it much easier and that is accessible to them and is affordable to them as well.
Wow. Well, you provide a tremendous service to African governments. You've told us how many you're working with. There are 54 countries. It sounds like all 54 should be working with you. And so my question is, for people who are out there wanting their governments to work with you, how do they advocate? How do they get you to come to their governments? How do they engage with their governments to make their governments understand how important this work is?
I will tell you how we're thrilled that all of the governments in Africa are calling on us. We are definitely available, and we have the resources for the entire continent to work with. And we look forward to engaging and calling us into it. I think the simplest way would be even just looking at www.africanenda.com, our website. You can also email us through that, or you can look my LinkedIn profile, connect with me. We are available. This is a great team that has deep African knowledge and expertise, and I work on the continent on digital, financial, digital economy. So we are here. Take us at our word. Use the expertise that is right there and let us work and provide solutions and support the journey of governments. I think we have to accelerate our path to financial inclusion. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, 2030 is like what, 6 years ahead from us. So if we truly want a digital economy that leaves no one behind in Africa, we have to accelerate our path to it. And there are enablers such as AfricaNenda in that ecosystem that are available to all governments in Africa. So I do hope that they will call us.
And just one last question. Who funds the work that you do? It's such great work. Who's making sure that you're able to do it for all the African countries?
Well, thank you very much. We are able to do this because of donors and grant money that is accessible and available to us. One of our partner and founder partner is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We've also collaborated with GIZ and the German government, and we are looking forward to expanding even our collaboration with several donors that are right there in the room, and that's the reason why I'm here, is enabling more partnerships so we can fund our activities and of course fund the work that governments need to do to make financial services available to all in Africa.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today, and thank you for the much bigger impact that you're doing on the continent.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It truly was a pleasure.